Okay, so we should be recording now. Welcome to our Learning to Grow series through Stanley County. Again, we're doing it virtually this year since we aren't able to do a lot of programs in person right now. But this is our third virtual canning class, and it is specifically on the application of pressure canning. And so I am happy to send out the recording if you haven't caught it yet, of our introduction to canning, which will help you maybe answer some questions to how we got to this point right here, why we're using pressure canning. And we'll talk a little bit more about it today, but in general, just a little feedback for those that are new to this series of online virtual canning classes. Safe Plates is our NC State, all of our food safety classes and resources and programs. And now a part of our Safe Plates programming is our home food preservation programs. And so this is the very first time I have used this PowerPoint. It's brand new to me. So we are all looking at this together really for the first time. So that's really exciting, which lets you know too, it's not outdated. And that's why Extension is such a great resource because we share things that are research based and that are up to date, because we want you to have access to the best and highest quality information. So we hope that you will continue to take extension classes even after today. All right, so let's practice that reaction. Raise your hand, or I guess there's not a hand raise. Give me a thumbs up if you have taken an extension class before. All right, I see several thumbs. Beautiful. Awesome. Good deal. So a lot of us are returning to take another class, which tells me we did something right. So that's exciting. That's wonderful. All right, let's go to our next slide here. Okay, so this next slide is a case study, and the reason why we like to share case studies is because we want you to know that we're not only just sharing research-based information, we're sharing stuff that really matters, because there have been real life situations where people got hurt or got sick or whatever it may be, and we don't want that to happen to you. We want you to know it happens. You know, we're not just sharing it because we want to. We're sharing it because we don't want this to happen again. So, there we go. This happens to me every time, y'all. The spring of 2019 in New York, we had 3 women who ate the same salad and contracted botulism. Okay, so what does this have to do with canning? And luckily they survived, but they needed prolonged intensive care and rehabilitation. This was traced back to a potato salad that was prepared using home canned peas. And I'm sure you're starting to figure out why this relates to our class today, okay? So, you know, if you can imagine those peas, they probably weren't canned right? And so we have learned previously there's 2 ways that we can can. We've got our boiling water bath and our pressure, but some things really need that high temperature of our pressure. So to continue the story, the canner used a peach preserve recipe and processing method she was familiar with to can these peas. She was unaware that low acid foods required pressure canning. So again, this is why you're here. And if you're thinking now, wow, I didn't know I had to do pressure canning for certain foods. Fantastic. You've already started the process of learning something new. So I'm really excited about that. I tell people all the time, if you're here, if you're alive to tell the tale, don't beat yourself up for doing stuff wrong. Start fresh today, and we're going to start doing it right. So again, luckily no one died in this case, but they did get severely sick, and there was a lot of time that it took to get their health back. So that's why we really want to make sure we're choosing the right canning method, and we're choosing a trusted recipe in order to can things properly. Anything you want to add at any time, Debbie, you just jump right in, okay? Oh, and you're on mute. Here, I'll unmute you. Well, it won't unmute. There we go.
Okay. No, I had a another Zoom session, and their trick for that Zoom session, if you hold your space bar down, you can temporarily unmute yourself. So I was trying
Oh,
to use that, but it's not working for ours, so I'm not sure. Yeah, I had a call yesterday. A lady said that she did 22 quarts of green beans, raw pack green beans, and Haley's going to talk about raw pack and hot pack. And they all failed, and she didn't understand why did all of the green beans fail. And it was because she did the raw pack correctly, and everything, she handled everything up to her processing. She processed 10 minutes in a boiling water canner. And I told her it was a blessing every jar failed, because she would have risk, she would have green beans at risk for botulism, and Haley's going to talk about what the risks are and everything. But so I told her it was a good thing, but she hated that she lost 22 quarts of green beans, but she was using boiling water, and she should have been using pressure canning.
wow. Yeah, it's scary that there's a lot of things that are wrong out there. And it was funny because last night I actually tried to find some videos of people doing it incorrectly, but uh, luckily I think it's maybe a little bit harder than I anticipated to find it, which is a good thing. But there's still a lot of folks out there that are not doing it the right way. So that's why we're here, to learn the right way. So learning objectives for today. We're going to understand the criteria for choosing pressure canning as the best canning method. We're going to identify the microorganism that causes problems in pressure canned foods, determine approved equipment for pressure canning, demonstrate proper steps to pressure canning, and identify which home preserved canned foods can be sold in North Carolina. So showing reaction, is there anybody that hopes to sell their canned goods someday? Any reaction will do. Okay, so y'all just, looks like everybody's here for their own personal benefit, which is a-okay too. All right. So again, if you are familiar with canning, if you have taken some of the previous classes, you know that acidity plays a huge factor in canning, and why we are able to can some things in a water bath canner and why we must can some things in a pressure canner. So we'll talk about that in the next slide, but I do want you to remember the number 4.6, which is a very important number in canning, and we'll talk about why here shortly, okay? So low acid foods are the foods that we work with and that we really want to focus on today with our pressure canning method. Because if you have low acid foods, that means it has a pH above 4.6. So looking back really quick at our scale here, right? We've got 4.6. If you see that tomato and that 4, so a little bit past that, if you go 4.6 and higher, that is going to be a low acid food, a low acid. So, and then if you've got the 4.6 to lower, to zero to 4.6, that's going to be a high acid food. So those are foods that can be in our boiling water canner. So let's go back to this slide. So again, above 4.6, so the number's actually getting bigger, but the acidity is getting less. All right. So this includes most foods like our vegetables, except rhubarb, most of our meats, our poultry, our seafood and milk, many soups, and mixtures of canned foods like spaghetti sauce with meat. So all these are things that are going to have a lower acidity, a pH above 4.6, and for that reason, we must can them in a pressured environment in order to reach a heat that is going to kill all microorganisms. All right. So, quick discussion, and feel free to chat, feel free to unmute. But why is knowing and understanding the proper canning process important? Why do you think it's important to know the proper canning process? And this kind of goes back to our case study.
Safety.
Safety, yes, absolutely. It's all we even said. You know, this is technically, even though it's a home preservation class, this is a food safety class. This is what canning is, food safety. It's not the same as cooking, right? And that's why we get creative with our recipes when we're cooking them. We don't get creative with our recipes when we're canning them. And that's because we are trying to follow a recipe that is going to be safe. So that is a quick and beautiful answer. Thank you. Anybody else want to share what was on their mind? And I know, you know, some of you are muted, so don't forget that, okay? All right, we'll keep going. So again, with our low acid foods, we said in our learning objectives, we're going to learn about that microorganism that we're really concerned about and the one that was in our case study, and that's Clostridium botulinum. So yeast, molds, and most bacteria, those are going to be destroyed at boiling water temperatures. So a lot of those things that affect our high acid foods, we can destroy easily with boiling water canners, right? However, with our low acid foods, we worry specifically about CBOT or Clostridium botulinum, and this particular pathogen forms spores that require higher temperatures for destruction in a reasonable period of time. And so, in order to reach that temperature, we have to use that pressure canner method because we reach a much higher temperature under pressure and with that steam environment than we do with just a boiling water environment. Botulism, this is what can happen to us, right, if we consume the Clostridium botulinum. And so this is what we definitely want to avoid. And so the spores, they kind of protect themselves in a heated environment. So if we don't reach that high enough temperature to kill them, they will protect themselves as a spore. And then once that jar starts to cool and it's in a comfortable environment at room temperature, without any oxygen, it actually thrives with no oxygen, then this spore will become a vegetative cell. And that's where it produces this poisonous toxin that can make us very, very sick and even kill us. And it specifically is a neurotoxin that causes paralysis and death if medical attention isn't found quickly. and just a small taste can be fatal. So again, a story that I've told before is one where there were off flavors where botulism was present, which is not always the case. And so someone had taken a taste, spit it out, still got very, very sick. But can you imagine if they would have consumed a much larger amount of those toxins? And so that's where it can be very fatal, is you don't always taste it. You don't always smell it, and it can be present. And again, the reason this is so important is because this is a toxin that is primarily associated with improperly home canned foods. And so even though this isn't the most common cause of foodborne illness, it is one of, if not the most fatal. And so we really want to make sure you're aware. And if you're going to can at home, we want you to do it right. So canning safely. How can we can safely? So home canning recommendations are based on destroying Clostridium botulinum. Again, at a pH of 4.6 or less, spores won't germinate. So high acid foods can be processed in a boiling water bath canner. That's great. But at a pH of 4.6 or higher, you have to get to that high heat of 240 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level to destroy Clostridium botulinum spores. So we're going to destroy them so that once we're done canning it, once our jar has sealed and we start to store that, we know that we're not going to be at risk for toxins forming in our beautifully canned product. Also, again, so pressure canner, it must be used for all low acid foods. And as of now, this is the only research-based method that we know of. That could change in the future. We know we have to hit that high heat. There might be other ways to hit it, but right now, this is the way we're going to do that. And this is the method we're going to use. So don't try to get creative and use other methods to kill that pathogen. We're going to use the pressure canner. And also, just as important as using the right equipment is following a trusted recipe. So follow recipe and follow it exactly, using the process times exactly. All right. So are we good? Give me thumbs up if we're good so far. All right.
Hayley, I'm going to just add, sometimes the question comes up about electric pressure cookers.
Oh.
And just always remember, you can cook in a pressure cooker. But you have to can in the pressure canner. Now, can you cook in the pressure canner? Yes, but you cannot can in a cooker. And there are no electric pressure canners on the market at this time. I believe Presto is trying to come out with one. They had advertised and they were going to start selling, but they had to recall it. So now I think the website is all still up, but you can't purchase it now because they still have to research. And the problem with your electric your electric pressure cookers, and when I say that, I'm talking about your Instapots, your multi-cookers, those, they can, well, sometimes, but they can achieve pressure, but they can't maintain it. And the only way you can maintain that 200, you have that 10 pounds of pressure if it's a weighted gauge, Hayley's going to get into it, or 11 pounds, or depending on if you're at a higher altitude, you'll have to use more pressure. But not only do you need to achieve that pressure needs to be maintained during the entire process. And right now with the electric cookers, what they do is they cycle up, they cycle down, they cycle back up, they cycle back down. And that's fine for cooking. Your food will cook just fine that way, but it does not work for canning.
Now, Quinta, did you have a question?
just wanted to know. Well, I did want to know if I could use my Instapot. She answered that, but I also wanted to know if there was a way to test for botulism. Like this would be my first time canning.
And no, you cannot, you can't taste it, you can't see it, any of that. That's why you always follow a tested recipe. Haley's going to go through all of the steps, and when you follow tested recipes, this has been, for each recipe there's approximately cost about $15,000 to test each recipe, and it's usually done in a university setting because they have the lab equipment that's done. So Haley's going to let you know about the National Center for Home Food Preservation. They're a test site, and that's where tested recipes come through them, and they're able to, they go through all the scenarios, and then it has to be replicated over and over again. And we're not only looking for the food safety, because the food safety part of it, that's very, very important. That's the overarching, you know, thing that you're trying to do, is make sure that the food is safe. But you also want the quality. You know, you want your safe food to taste good. And that's one of the things that they do with the recipes is, okay, what type of process can be done so that we have a safe product that's safe to eat, and it's good to eat, high quality, it looks good, it tastes good, it's a good texture, it's a good consistency, all of that. With tested recipes, all of that work is done for you as long as you follow all of the steps and you don't skip any. Because there's not a test for home users where, you know, it'd be wonderful if you could take a little strip, dip it in, and it comes up and says not only botulism, but if it has E. coli or listeria or campylobacter or salmonella, that would be wonderful. But that type of testing is not available to a home user. So for home use, you follow a tested recipe, and you're covered. You just don't skip any steps.
That was an
Thank,
awesome question, Quinta. I really like that question.
thank you.
Mhm. All right, and keep them coming. So we're going to continue on, and we're going to talk about our steps for pressure canning. So again, follow a trusted recipe and follow it exactly. Not all foods are prepared the same way. Not all foods are going to be processed at the same amount of times, but in general, we'll find we kind of follow the same steps. So before we talk about these steps, which foods, and I challenge you to just, submit a food into the chat box that should be processed in a pressure canner. All right, so we've got green beans, we've got tomatoes, asparagus, corn, meats. Yeah, perfect. Anybody else want to submit one?
I also see a question. Someone has asked the question, what about vacuum pack frozen? Vacuum pack and then placing in the freezer is excellent, you know, for quality. The thing that makes it safe, though, is not the vacuum packing. The thing that makes it safe is that it's frozen. Now, frozen food, as far as safety goes, it's safe indefinitely. As long as it's in the freezer that maintains it in a frozen state, that food is safe. Quality wise, generally the recommendations, and it's going to depend entirely on the food, but you maintain high quality with frozen foods from 6 months to a year. That's where you have high quality. And then after that, the quality starts to decline. But as far as safety, it will always be safe. Now, where vacuum packing is excellent with freezing, some of the things that help or cause the food to decline in quality, vacuum packing prevents that. Now, where you have to be careful with vacuum packing is if it's not frozen. So there are different, dehydrated foods. I know some people like to dehydrate and then vacuum pack, there could be some safety issues with that if you have not vacuum packed, if you have not dehydrated to a level where there's no moisture. If there's any moisture in there and you vacuum pack and it's in the regular pantry, then you are at risk for botulism. But if it's in the freezer is your control.
And Debbie, we have another question about, can you can frozen food? And
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, you can. You can.
Now, what will the quality be less?
Probably.
And so that's why you'll see a lot of our recipes start off with choose high quality, fresh. You know, there's kind of definitely a positive to using the fresher food there.
Now there's a corn relish recipe that I have. Now this isn't, you don't pressure can the corn relish, you know, this is going to be boiling water canned, but I have a corn relish recipe and I used frozen corn for that, and it's wonderful. It comes out, you know, awesome. So I'm just going to leave, can you can frozen foods? Safety wise, yes. Quality wise, maybe.
And I had a private question that I'm just going to share because I want everybody to know the answer to this. And it's can we schedule an appointment to check our pressure canner lids? And we'll talk about getting those checked and which ones need to be checked. But absolutely, at the extension office, whether you're in Stanley County or another county, you can contact your local extension office and we test those pressure canner lids for free. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right. So any other questions before we move on? So again, we want to can most of our vegetables, our meats, our poultry, our fish, our foods that have those combinations. That's what we want to be processing in a pressure canner. Now, can you process high acid foods in a pressure canner and it be safe? Absolutely, you can process it and be safe. And even some high acid foods give you the option to use a pressure canner, but maybe the quality for certain foods won't be as good if you use that high of a heat. So in general, again, use that trusted recipe and you should be good to go. There are things that happen sometimes, but in general, you should be safe. Okay, so again, for pressure canning, guys, we're going to use for our low acid foods specifically. And again, that's because we need to process this food at that 240 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what the inside of our canner, that steam is going to reach 240. Boiling water can't reach 240. And so this is going to be the best method to kill those Clostridium botulinum spores. And you have a couple of different options of pressure canners that you can use and that you might see online as if you are needing to buy a new one right now. I'll tell you, I tried to go find a new one at Walmart the other day and they are gone. Everybody has decided to get new canners this year. So online might be your best bet, but there are dial gauge canners and there's weighted gauge canners, and some people like dial and some people like weighted. It's totally your preference. And if you have the space at home to can do two canners at once, you might want to try one of each. Who knows? And just see how they work differently. There are even different brands of dial and weighted gauge that might work a little bit differently. So in general, it's always good that whichever one you go with, that you become familiar with the pieces of your particular canner, that you read your manufacturer's instructions, because they don't all work exactly the same. And so if you get comfortable with one canner and then maybe it gets old and you need to replace it and you get a different brand, that canner might not work the same. It might be quite different, and you might have to take care of it differently. So definitely read up on your canner and get comfortable with it. Take the time to read those manufacturer's instructions. All right. So with that said, understand your equipment. That's what we just said, right? And so you see right here that it's showing us there are a few different types of our pressure canners. The one that's kind of toward the front that has the green beans inside of it, that is one of our weighted gauge examples, and it really shows how that weight is what will rock at a steady motion once you reach a specific pressure. And one that is also a weighted gauge, but it's a little bit different. If you see the circle with the 3 holes, and I have one like that here. This is also a weighted gauge, and you just you find, okay, it's hard to get in front of the camera, but you find the weight that you need for your altitude and for your specific recipe, and that's how you place it on top of your canner. And this one doesn't jiggle near as much as the other one, and so that was something that threw me off because I was so used to the other weight, and this one is very different, very different. So you have to, again, gain that confidence and learn how that one works. And then the one toward the back with the dial on it, that one, it just has a needle that rises until you reach the amount of pressure that's required for you, for your recipe and your altitude, and you will want to hold it there throughout that processing time. So all of these, again, they're going to work a little bit differently. They're going to go a little bit differently, but in general, if you use them properly, if you follow the trusted recipe, you're going to have a safe product. So are there any questions about these pressure canners? Okay. I don't see any questions. All right, so again, oh wait, go ahead, Debbie. Did you
Okay, I want to go run really quickly because you had the sample example of one type of weighted gauge, and just in case someone goes, I don't see that type often, and it's fine if that's one that you get, wonderful, but they've gone to this model, so I'll hold it here. And basically, if you and that's what you're seeing pictured on the screen, if you put this on the canner, that's going to be 5 pounds of pressure. When you add a ring, that's 10 pounds of pressure. And then when you add the last ring, that's 15 pounds of pressure. So this is probably what you're going to, if you get a weighted gauge, that's what you're probably going to see. And it's personal preference. It's completely dial gauge. If you want to use the dial gauge, as long as you're using it properly, it works wonderfully. If you decide that you like the weighted gauge, if you use it properly, it works wonderfully. I see a raised hand again.
Do you have a recommended brand or a recommended price range? How much we should spend for one of these devices?
Well, I mean, whatever you choose, because they're all vetted, tested, they're all going to be safe to use. That's usually what will drive you on the brand that you choose, is how much they're charging. And they run the gamut. I mean, Presto pretty much owns the market. They've bought everyone else out except for All American. All American, they have wonderful, excellent canners. They're very expensive canners, but they're good. With Presto, it costs less. The weighted gauge, that's one of the things that you'll notice with Presto, the weighted gauge canners do cost less than the dial gauge canners. So that might be something that will influence, your decision on purchasing the canner. But as far as all of the canners go, they're recommended. And for those who have the old All-American canner, don't get rid of, I mean, even if you have the old one with the petcock, you know, on one of Hayley's previous slides, it says older models. All-American canners, there's two parts. I want to say it's part 67 and part 69, where you can convert your old All-American canner to a weighted gauge canner, and you're good to go. So if you do have one of the older, or someone gives you, or if you find that I've heard of people finding All-Americans at, one person said they bought one at a flea market. No, I'm sorry, the garage sale. They paid $10 for it. It was never used. It was still in the box. And American canners go from the high 200s and up for canners. So if you happen to find one at a garage sale, and it costs you $10, $15, grab the box and run very quickly.
Can you use a pressure cooker that is not necessarily a canner, or do you recommend only using a canner?
No, you can, like I said, for canning, you can only use a pressure canner. You cannot use a pressure cooker. Pressure cookers are designed to cook food. They're not designed to can food. Now, if you happen to invest in a pressure canner, you can use it to cook your food also. That's not a problem. It's just that you can't can in a cooker.
And some of them are marketed, they're labeled as a canner and a cooker, right? And I'll say this too, because Quinta,
Canner cookers are fine.
yeah,
But they're if it says, and that's why it just to let people know, yes, this is a canner, but you can cook in it, you know, and that's what they're trying to let people know. It's just that when you see things like multi cookers or the electric ones, all of the electric ones that you see, those are all pressure cookers. There are no electric pressure canners on the market.
I also wanted to add that if you do decide to get a dial, we'll talk about how the dial gauge canners need to be tested annually. And at the extension office, we have a test, a dial gauge tester, but it really is it only works well typically with the Presto brand. So, you know, if you want to get it easily tested, you know, I suggest, you know, maybe thinking about Presto. And again, they typically have a better price point anyway, I think, than some of the others. But I wanted a Presto weighted gauge, because as you see, our weighted gauge is like this, and I wanted one of the other ones. And anyway, I couldn't find a Presto anywhere, and I ended up getting a Miro that jiggles. So, you know, it's right now, especially during canning season, you might not have full range of all the options. So that's something to consider too.
And Presto owns Miro.
Okay, well, there we go. It looked very similar. It looked
and you can use the tester that you have in your office to test the Miros. It's only good for Prestos and Miros.
There we go. So yeah, because I've had people bring in All-Americans, and I'm like, this will not fit. This is not going to fit. I'm sorry, I can't. So I guess you just have to send it into the manufacturer.
Yes, you have to send it, and All-American does not test its dial gauges. That's why they send you the new parts. They're going to have you, because All-American does not make dial gauge only canners anymore. They make canners that are dial gauge and weighted gauge are both on the lid of the canner. It's a weighted gauge canner. The dial gauge is just so that you can see the pressure that it's at. So that's why they don't test it. If you have a dial gauge only All-American canner, they don't test. They're going to have you get the two parts to convert it to a weighted gauge only.
All right, let's keep talking about our equipment here. We've got again, we said you got to understand your equipment. There's different brands, different types of canners. So again, read your manufacturer's instructions thoroughly before you use the first time, and you might even find yourself reading them each year before your canning season, because you know, everybody's canning around this time of year when stuff is fresh, and after months go by, you get a little foggy on how things work. So it's not a bad idea to read those several times. Some assembly is required upon first use. Again, just get to know your canner and how to assemble it properly. Make sure you have all the pieces necessary, that nothing's gone missing, and how to assemble it. Clean and remove manufacturing oils. Check your gasket. And, you know, there's different gaskets on different canners as well, that are handled a little bit differently. So again, just in general, depending on what kind of canner you have, get to know the different pieces of that canner, and that's going to be in your instructions. Lightly coat exposed gasket and lugs with cooking oil if necessary. Again, that's where reading those instructions is helpful, because it might not be necessary with certain canners. Check that vent pipes are clear and open before use. So again, for example, for my mirror that I have here, you see this vent pipe right here. I'm going to hold this up to the light and just make sure before I start using this canner that pipe is cleared, that nothing has gotten in there that could clog it and prevent this from working like it needs to, right? So here's my little piece that I'm going to make sure the gasket is not dried out, not cracked, and, you know, just proper storage is going to help a lot with keeping things from going bad quicker, or having to be replaced quicker. Okay. All right. So now we're going to go through our basic steps of pressure canning. And so number one, it says to fill our canner with 2 to 3 inches of water and heat until simmering. So again, the reason why we want to fill it only with 2 to 3 inches is because with our pressure canner, we're going to fill it up with steam, and it's going to be the heat of that steam that's going to reach that 240. So we really don't want to do like our boiling water, where we're completely covering our jars with water. We're just going to put 2 to 3 inches. So I'm just kind of doing a pretend one over here. So here's my canner. We've got water. We're going to fill this up 2 to 3 inches. And our canners, as we use them, they will even form kind of a line on the inside. And you'll just see where your water goes up to. So that will kind of help you to, where you don't have to like measure it every time or whatever. You don't have to think about it too hard. You'll just see where your water kind of stops. So we fill it up with 2 to 3 inches. We're going to turn it up. We're going to turn up the heat so that we have that water warming up. Okay. So then again, part of our equipment in this that we learned about in our introduction to canning is our 3-piece jar. We've got our canning jar, because this jar is going to be suited for high heat and for canning. So we've got our canning jar and then our 2-piece lid. That's what we're going to use. And again, we're going to use this to can our vegetables, our meats. So let's pretend like we've got our vegetables in here. Maybe we're doing some green beans today, and then we have our hot boiling water that we put on top of it. Pretend it's hot boiling water. And then we're going to put our lid on, finger tight, using our jar lifter if it's hot, and you can fill up that canner just like so. All right, so you're putting your jars, and notice it says on a rack in the canner. So again, another reason why you want to use a pressure canner versus a pressure cooker to can is because you're probably not going to get that rack that you need to go with it, right? So we really need that rack so that we can set those jars on that and get that that steam, that heat moving around those jars. That's part of that processing. Then after we get all of our food placed in there, filled according to our recipe we're using, we're going to put on the canner, put the lid on the canner with the weight off or the petcock open. All right, so again, we're going to learn while we do this. So we're going to put that lid on. And here's my weight for this particular one. So what I'm going to do, I'm cranking up the heat, but I'm leaving this weight off. And the reason is because we're going to build steam up into this pressure canner here, because again, it's that steam that's going to reach that high heat. So we're going to wait until we see steam coming out of our vent here, and we're going to let this vent for 10 minutes to build up the steam. And that's what's next on here. We're going to vent or exhaust our canner for 10 minutes. So you're going to see a V of steam coming out of that vent right there, and you are going to time 10 minutes. And so this is going to push out all the air from our canner, and it's going to fill it up with a pure steam environment. And then once we have 10 minutes, again, depending on if you have what kind of canner you have, this next step might look a little bit different. Either you might use that type of weight that Debbie showed us. You might have a weight like this. You might have a dial gauge canner, so you know, that they could all be a little bit different, but you're going to cover that vent up, and then you're going to build your pressure. So close that vent or petcock, and then we're going to build that pressure. So we're going to start counting the time once our correct pressure is reached. So again, depending on your altitude, where you're canning from, is going to change what kind of weight you're going to have to add to your canner. So if you're using a dial gauge, for example, for my particular altitude, I'll bring the dial gauge up to 11. For my weighted gauge, I put a 10-pound weight on. So you really just have to know what your altitude is for where you're canning. And at the end of processing time, you're going to turn off your heat. So again, that's the processing time is just based on what recipe you're using as well. Any questions so far? I know that's a lot of information, a lot going on. Okay, everybody's being quiet. We must be answering everything. Okay, so next we want to cool it off. So again, we don't want a huge shock to what our food and our jars. So we don't want to just lift this off, right? And the steam come flying out. You could definitely lose some liquid from your jars that way. That's one way you could lose some liquid. But we want to leave that on, leave that covered, turn the heat off, and let the pressure naturally drop down to 0. And then after that, you're also going to wait 2 additional minutes, making sure that pressure is completely to 0. So it's definitely not like our Instant Pot. We can't just let all that steam go flying out. We have to let that come down kind of on its own. Do we have any questions, Debbie?
Yeah, we do. I had a question come in, and someone asked about canning without a rack. The reason that you have a rack is because you have to have the water circulating under the jars as well as around the jars. And pretty much with canning depends on convection and conduction. So when you think about conduction, that's going to be heat transfer, where the water that's on the steam that's on the outside of the jars, it's hot. So it's going to heat up the glass. The food that's touching the jars, the inside of the jar, that's going to get hot. It's going to heat up the food that's next to it, the food that's next to it, the food that's next to it, so that the heat's going to be conducted through the food. Well, you also have convection, and convection is where you have that circulation, and you need both for pressure canning. So you need the heat to conduct through, that's going to happen, but you need the convection, you need the heat to circulate to make sure that you get that 240 degrees to the core of that jar. Every portion of it needs to reach 240. When you don't use a rack, you do not get that conduction, you do not get proper convection. So, and the conduction that's occurring may not suffice. The other problem with it is you have a higher risk for breakage because you have the jars sitting on the bottom of the pot. So you never want the jars in contact, because you think about that's a tremendous amount of heat. And then you have what's called heat shock. So you have glass jars that are sitting on the bottom of the pot that are getting a lot hotter than the glass that's above it, because it's not in direct contact, with the pot. So you don't want to do heat shock. Now, I've heard of some people, they'll put towels. They know that this happens. They've broken jars, so they'll roll up towels, or they'll put towel at the bottom. That's still going to interfere with your convection. So always use a rack. Replacement racks, they sell those. You can buy, they usually come in two packs, or you can use a cake. See if you have a round cake rack. You think about the cooling rack for your cakes. That sometimes will fit into your pot, but you just need something that's open, that's going to allow for the convection of, that water circulation to go on. There's another good question. Someone had asked, let's see. Oh, there's a couple. Is it okay for overpressure plug to stay up during the entire time of processing? That's when it's overpressure. If it stays up the entire time, you are over processing your food. Because you think about it, overpressure, you're probably in the 15 pounds of pressure. We do that in high altitudes. So if you're overpressure, I think overpressure usually kicks in 18 to 20 pounds. And I'm trying to do the temperature conversions, and we're talking about 280 degrees that you're canning at. Now that might sound low because you think about, well, I put my oven on a whole lot hotter than that. But if you think about cooking a chicken, you might put a chicken into a 375 degree oven until you get that chicken to 165 degrees. When you're cooking food in the pressure canner, the food is reaching, 240 degrees. That's a really high temperature. So when you're cooking over pressure, you're cooking, you're reducing the quality. Is it safe? Yes. Quality wise, that's where you get into mushiness and, all of that, color changes. More than likely, you're going to have a lot of loss of liquid from your jar. So you'll have half jars or less of liquid in there. You don't want it to, oh, I see. She's saying with the overpressure plug to stay. That's your safety plug. That's your lock. So it should stay up the whole, it's going to stay up the whole process. That's going to keep you from taking the lid off. I think you, Ms. Muhammad, you might have to verbally, say what you're asking, because if you're asking about that little lock that comes up, that's your safety lock to keep you from opening up the canner while it's under pressure, and you want that to stay up the entire time of processing. So if that's what you're asking, yes, you want that to stay up. If you're saying there's some kind of overpressure to let you know that you are above 15 pounds of pressure, then that would be no, but I'm not exactly sure of what you're asking there. And then someone asked about canning dry goods, rice, flour, beans in the oven. Oven canning is not recommended. Canning jars were designed for wet application. oven is a dry application. So not only are the jars not designed for oven canning, the bands and the lids, none of that is designed for dry application. And you're also at risk, it's a hazard because you're at a risk for breakage. The recommendation for dry goods, the thing that you want to do with dry goods, you want to keep them dry. That's the reason why people like to put them in bags, because what you're trying to do is you don't want the moisture that's in the air to get into the food, because that's what lessens the shelf life. That's what, cuts down shelf life. So you want to make sure that you keep it in dry. If you have exposure to if you have exposure to animals, rodents, insects can chew through plastic. So that's why we tell people put it in dry application. And then you might want to keep things in cans that rodents or insects cannot get into. So that's the recommendation for dry goods. And then, okay, so with the rubber plug, yeah, the rubber plug, to stay up, it might have a little pressure on it because there is pressure on it. But what that pressure plug does, what that rubber pressure does, is if it's too much pressure, I mean, instead of that lid going, that little plug is going to pop out and release the pressure that's inside of the canner. So you might see it bumping up some, but that's okay, because that's why there's pressure that's on it. That's fine. You just don't want the pressure to be so high that you blow your plug. So just keep an eye on your canner. If you're using a weighted gauge, like Hayley said, it's going to jiggle. If it's just, rocking, I don't have my canner with me, but if it's just doing a little, you can hear it. What's going.
Which
you're
slide
fine.
is it that shows that rocking, Debbie? Is it?
Oh yeah, you should be able to click on that. Yeah, click on the picture.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, click on the picture. See if it. Oh no, go back. There's like it should.
See if I passed it.
I think that's it.
Oh, okay. Oh, I bet it's not gonna.
Oh, it might not do. Oh, you know what? You cannot show video on Zoom.
Oh no.
Zoom will not let it, but yeah, because I embedded a little thing in there, and it just goes. But if you have it where it's going, it's just losing it. Turn your heat down a little bit. Now, if you have it and it's just sitting there, and it just sits there, and it just sits there, yeah, you don't have enough heat. So you want enough heat where it's like, it's gently rocking. It doesn't have to be violent at all.
Do we have any other questions? Those were great questions, everybody. Thank y'all so much. This is a very interactive group, and I love it. I love it. All right, let's go to our next steps, and y'all just, shout out anytime you think of something. But again, the last thing we did, we waited 10 minutes, even after it came down to 0. We didn't want a sudden surge of pressure. And so then we're waiting 10 minutes. We're waiting 10 minutes. Once we take that weight off, or remove that petcock to release any little bit of whatever that might be in there, we are going to let it sit, continue to cool another 10 minutes, and then you carefully are going to open. My dogs are going crazy, y'all. You're going to carefully open your canner lid because there's still going to be a little steam in there. So carefully open that away from your face. Again, it's very hot in there. It's holding steam. So open it carefully. Remove your jars. You'll definitely want to use your jar lifter for that to make it easy. And place your jars on a padded surface. So you might have a towel. You might have a cooling rack. And give the jars 12 to 24 hours undisturbed because you don't want to chance them from not sealing. So this is during this cooling process is when you're going to get your seal to form. You can then remove your bands, wash them off, dry them off so you can reuse them at a later time. And check your jars for your seals. So again, you might hear a popping sound. You might see that the lids are concave. You might press down and they're not popping up and down. So you want to check and make sure they're sealed before you store them, because then you're going to have something nasty on your hands, right? All right, that is all of our steps. Does anybody have any questions about our steps so far? Any other comments?
Are these slides available after the presentation?
Absolutely, yes. I will be sending out the recording, and I can also send out just the slides if you would like that too.
Thank you.
Absolutely, you're welcome. So last but not least, none of you said that your plan was to sell, but once you really get excited about this, you never know, in the future you might be interested in doing so. So there are food safety rules in place to protect consumers from getting sick. So if you're interested in selling home canned foods, it's important to know what you can and can't sell. And the NCDA's home food biz is an excellent place for you to go and learn about what you can sell, what you need to do to sell. So if you're interested, you can go to that site. You can go to that link right there. Also, if you're interested in selling acidified foods, you need additional training. So the Acidified Foods Processing School, or also known as the Pickle School, provides additional training, so you can go check out that website. So are there any questions about any of those items there? No. All right. So quick review, and we're going to do a quick quiz. So we talked about criteria for choosing the pressure canning method, approved equipment. So we've got our pressure canners. That's it. Pathogen of concern, botulism, and those toxins. We really worry about those. They're a huge concern. Pressuring canning steps, our basic steps for all of our pressured items, and also selling those home preserved foods. So that is our presentation. Let me now see, does anybody have any other questions? I'm going to pull up a quick quiz for us. Somebody said, let me see those puppies. Y'all hear them? They're running around the house. They're going in and out the doggy door. They're absolutely crazy. I don't know what's happening. Okay. Let's see if I can get this quiz pulled up. Let's share this one. All right. And you can just put your the letter answer in the chat box. So number one, which food must be pressure canned? A, vegetable soup, B, crushed tomatoes, C, pickled green beans, or D, all the above. And the key word here is must. All right, so I see a D, I see lots of A's. Okay, so if you said A, you are correct. And let's talk about why for a second, all right? So vegetable soup, we know most of our vegetables have to be pressure canned to be preserved safely. Crushed tomatoes, you will find that, again, Most of our tomatoes, the pH is right there around 4.6. So with any of our varieties of tomatoes, they tend to say add lemon juice to the recipe, and you can really boiling water can or pressure can a lot of our tomato recipes. And again, follow those trusted recipes and you'll see that a lot of times tomatoes gives you an option to do either one, so it's not necessarily a must. And then pickled green beans, the key word there is what? Is pickled, right? So those have been acidified, so those are going to be a high acid food. So if you said D, I know why. This was a trick question. We're trying to trick you up. I love it. But the answer is A. Great job. Number 2, how long do you vent a pressure canner before building the pressure? 1, 5, 10, or none of the above? Lovely. Yes, everybody is saying C. I love seeing C. So yes, that one was 10 minutes. Perfect. Number 3, what does processing your jars in a pressure canner do? It prevents the growth of bacteria like CBOT. It kills yeast. It kills mold. It does it all. Right, it does it all. Yes, obviously the reason we're doing it in the pressure canner is because of A, but we're definitely wanting to preserve it safely, which means getting rid of all pathogens. What do you do when the processing time has completed? Do you turn off your burner? Do you allow the canner to cool on its own? Do you remove the pressure regulator, or do you do A and B? All right, I see a lot of D's, and D is correct. Good job. So yeah, we want to turn it off, let it cool on its own. So don't try to force that cooling. Go find something else to do if you need to.
Okay,
Um,
I have to stop you. What do you do when the processing time is completed? Everybody said it was what? And I guess that's kind of, yeah, it's A and B. I'm sorry, I was thinking, I thought I heard remove the pressure regulator, and you do not. It's A and B. You turn off the canner, you allow it to cool on its own. You do not remove that. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought
that's
somebody said,
okay.
yeah,
That's okay. Look, I'm easy to misunderstand. I'm from
I
Alabama,
thought somebody
so
said
it's okay.
remove pressure regulator. Don't remove the pressure regulator.
Yes. Turn it off. Don't remove it. And I might have said that. I don't know, but definitely just A and B. Good job, y'all. All right. Number 5. How long should you let your jars cool after processing? Yes. B. Good. So 12 to 24 hours. This is part of that process. This is part of the cooling is when we get that seal to form. So we have to give it time to cool. They come out boiling hot. You'll see the liquid just boiling within the jar, and you want to let it cool on its own. Now, did I pull up the wrong one? Because this one's got marks through it. Uh-oh, I don't hear you, Debbie.
So you can do number 6, skip 7,
Okay.
do 8, and do 9.
I
Yeah,
might did
just skip 7.
Okay, I might have pulled up the wrong one. Okay, number 8. So, can you reprocess jars that have not sealed? And I don't think we talked about this. So this might be a good, just see if y'all know this. Can you reprocess jars that have not sealed? We've got A, we've got B. And we didn't talk about it, so we might not know. Debbie, do you want to talk about this a little bit? I would love for you to.
Sure. And the answer is going to be yes. You can reprocess. You have to do it within 24 hours of when you initially started. So, and then also keep in mind, reprocessing does not mean, and the reason you would put reprocess is because either your jars did not seal or you realized you didn't process correctly, meaning you didn't process long enough, you forgot to vent, whatever it is that you realized that your processing was incorrect. Yes, you can reprocess within 24 hours, but you have to open the jars, remove the food, bring it back up to temp. You know, if you're doing a hot pack, well, all of it, whenever reprocessing, you have to bring the food up. You have to put hot food into clean hot jars using new lids and clean bands. And then you do the processing the same way you would when you started the first time. So that's what it takes for reprocessing. Now, this is a safe way of doing it. Will the food be safe if you reprocess? Yes, it's safe. Will the quality go down? Probably. So what I tell people to do with reprocessing, if you had jars that didn't seal or you realize you didn't do something correct within 24 hours and they're not sealed, fine, just stick them in the fridge. And it's cooked food. Handle it the same way you would handle cooked food. If you realized you processed improperly, it's been within 24 hours, but you do have sealed jars, break the seal and just stick it in the refrigerator and again, consume it. The other option, freeze it. So you can, you know, whatever it happens to be, you can remove the contents. If you happen to have canned in freezer jars, make sure that they're jars that are designed for freezing. These are going to be your wide mouth jars with the straight sides. If you have jars, you know, you think about your regular canning jars, you know, the neck goes in a little bit. Those do not freeze, you're going to break the jar. But if you have freezer jars, and it will say on the box, freezer jar, it will say it on the jar, and it will give you a little indicator, a level to tell you how much food to go in there. So when you freeze it, you're leaving headspace. When it freezes, it doesn't break the seal because the contents expand and push against the lid. So whenever freezing in the jars, you go by that indicator on the top that says fill here. But if it's in freezer jar, the freezer jars can just go into the freezer. But that's some of the things that you can do if you don't want to reprocess. You can eat it, you can store it for a few days and eat it, or you can freeze it.
Perfect. So we have one more question, and this is on storage. And we talked about this a little bit during our intro, and I'm happy to send again those out, but let's see who knows the answer. How should you store your jars of home canned foods? In the garage with the bands on, in a cool dark space with the bands off, in a closet or attic with the bands off, or none of the above? And I'm seeing B, so that's perfect. Yes. Good job, everybody. I love it. All right. So this is going to conclude our presentation for today. And I will send out this recording. I will send out the presentation. I will also send out a short video that goes through the steps of pressure canning. And you will want to, for additional canning information, again, you can always reach out to me, but the best site to visit, and you'll want to write this down if you, I'm going to put it in the chat box, but this is the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and I'm going to put in the chat box the link so that y'all can have it. And what I tend to do is go to Google, type in home food preservation, and it's the first one that comes up. But let me send this to everyone. So that is the link to it. It's nchfp.uga.edu/. And this is going to take you to all of the trusted canning information, drying information, freezing information. They have videos available, and that's what I'm going to be attaching to the email I send out to you guys. So it's just a quick, I think it's like 2 minutes, and it goes over all the details of pressure canning, which is really helpful for something, a quick refresh. But that is a definite recommended resource. Again, if you like to have a book, a great book, also by the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension, there it is. So easy to preserve. So Debbie's holding it up now. And are there any other little tidbits of resources, advice? The Ball Blue Book, perfect. And that's a less expensive option that you can usually find at Walmart if they're not sold out. Love that one. But all of these, oh, what's this? The Principles of Home Canning. Oh yeah, you can print off the USDA's Guide to Home Canning online, and that's free. Beautiful. So all those are great resources, and they all might have a little bit different ways of canning similar things that are tested recipes. So that's why it's good to have access to different trusted research-based resources, because there might be one that you like that, but you know, on a different resource. So yeah, any questions about those resources? All right. Last but not least, if there's not any questions or comments, I'm going to shoot you guys a link to the evaluation for today's class. And if y'all could just fill that out, I would be so grateful. Open it up, and I will share this link with you guys. And, you know, all feedback is good feedback. Thank you so much, Quinta, for joining us. Thank you, all of y'all, for your awesome questions. Caitlin, great to have you again. I will be offering a drying class and a freezing class coming up soon. So if you're interested in those, feel free to reach out to me. I will also put my email address there. Debbie, if you want to share yours too, y'all can reach out to either one of us. Like I said, you know, the FCS agent in Stanley County doing classes locally. Debbie is really very knowledgeable about food safety and food preservation, so she's a great resource too. So yeah, but that's it for today. So thank you guys so much. Thank you for joining me.
I sent the chat to you, so you got it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you.
You're
so
welcome.
much. Bye.
Next week?
Let me check.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
I think I took a couple of weeks off.
Yeah.